All right, we're live. Once again, it is Monday, and we are live. Let's get this show on the road. Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to the show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined with my good friend Doug Hagren. Hey, Doug.
Morning, Kirk. It's Monday. You're always going to get the best of us on a Monday, like the many of you out there. Good news is, since you'll be tired, you'll be half listening, and since we'll be tired, we'll be half speaking. But hey, the most important thing, though, I was able to still afford my cup of coffee this morning that I brewed myself because, it sounds like nobody can afford Starbucks anymore. However, what's interesting is I saw a statistic last week or the week before. Well, not statistic. If you look at Starbucks stock, it just tanked, right? They missed all these numbers. But yet this weekend, I was on a road trip. My daughter plays soccer, so we went to Iowa. And every Starbucks that we passed had a line of 10, 15 cars in the drive-thru. So I'm still trying to figure out like how I know coffee prices went through the roof for a while, and I'm sure that degraded profits. But Starbucks didn't just have revenue drop or profit drop; they had revenue drop. I don't see it. It's like I keep hearing all this. The sky's falling, but if it's falling, it missed all the cars in the drive-through line because they are just. I mean, one thing America doesn't live off Dunkin'. Let me tell you that. It's
Boston does though, Doug.
Boston absolutely does every quarter. I always joke about it's funny because Dunkin's theme is America runs on Dunkin', and Dunkin' isn't everywhere. I remember when I was young, Dunkin' moved into Ohio, and then all of a sudden they all closed up shop, and then they came back several years later, and then they all closed up shop, and now they're national again. America does not run on Dunkin'. The Northeast runs on Dunkin', but you know who runs on? Canada runs on Tim Hortons. That is everywhere. You go to any small town in Canada, that is their number one restaurant and coffee shop. It is busy all the time, and it's really good, by the way. But anyway, moving on.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, Canada doesn't have a lot of variety up there either, Doug.
Well, yeah, some different fish, a couple different types of deer, a couple of different types of bear, so they got some variety.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they got a few things up there, but I get your point, Doug. Yeah. No, I mean, look, it's certainly Dunkin's always been a big thing here, but not until the Super Bowl with the Dunk Kings. Like that was a great commercial.
That was fantastic.
Kudos to Dunkin' for that commercial. That was grade A.
Grade A and kudos to the actors that got into it. I mean, yeah. Listen, Matt Damon made that commercial. This is a sarcastic. Oh God, here we go again. Ben, really, the stuff I do for you, man. You owe me big time as a friend. It was great. It really was. It's one of the. I mean, there's been a plethora of great Super Bowl ads over the years, but I will throw that down as probably easily in my top 5 ever. It was hysterical. Yeah, and it was all Matt Damon. I mean, Ben Affleck's willingness to get. To do that role, Jennifer Lopez's willingness to play in it, but Matt Damon's face and comments just made it.
It really was great A work, I have to say. Kudos to all of them for making it happen, making us laugh. Not much makes us laugh anymore because humor is outlawed nowadays. It's
Seinfeld came out this last week and just said I couldn't make the show today, and I guess there's a new poll that just came out that said all these people that are going back now, younger, listening to the old Seinfeld shows, super offensive, right? It just tells you everything you need to know. We just have a different sensitivity these days to so many different things. Speaking of sensitive, last night was the roast of Tom Brady, pulling that together there. And there's some interest. I'm not going to talk about it, but if you should go back, look at some clips on how that went last night. A lot of skewering, a little bit of sensitive nerves there too, that I think will get people interested. And by the way, officially now, according to Forbes, Jerry Seinfeld has joined the Billionaires Club. So he has crossed over according to estimates. Now his publicist says this is not true, but I mean, he's everywhere now. And the new movie just came out on Pop-Tarts and, Seinfeld's in syndication. If Jerry's not a millionaire or a billionaire, I'm not sure I'm an American. I mean, it's just, The thing just keeps making money. I mean,
well, Jerry has the kind of humor that can survive our crazy era. You know, what's interesting is, I mean, when COVID happened, before that, but really after COVID happened, comedy just died because people lost their sense of humor. You know, they lost their ability to parse between comedy, humor, and reality. People are like, that's not funny. Well, actually, it is funny. I mean, the whole point of comedy is to push boundaries. You know, I mean, Richard Pryor was huge at pushing boundaries. And, you know, that's one of the reasons why, you know, he was who he was, because
George
he just,
Carlin.
George Carlin, same way. I mean, so many people push boundaries. And, you know, in this era, people lost their sense of humor. They're not willing to push boundaries. I mean, the whole point of comedy is to do something provocative, is to do something that's like, you know, when you go way over the line, it's not funny, right? But when you don't go near the line, it's also not funny. The humor in it is when you're saying things that you probably shouldn't say, but you do it in a way that's like, all right, that was good, right? That's the charm of humor. And that's actually why, you know, I've said this, the mark of AI being a first-rate intelligence is when it can start creating its own humor. Because humor is the ability to discern between, like, in the provocative area where, like, you can, like, there are people out there, like Elon Musk is a perfect example. Like, he says things that are provocative. It's not way over the line, but it's like really on the line. It's like, oh man, that was good. That was, I mean, whether you like him or not, you're like, all right, that was sharp. Like, he has that ability to dunk on people in a way that, yeah, sometimes he goes over, and he can because he's the richest guy in the world. But I think for the most part, like, you know, the humor is when you have the ability to know where that line is, and to straddle the line in a way. It's like, that was close, but I guess I can laugh at that, right? And so, you know, I'm a fan of humor. I've always been, you know,
that's good to hear. I'm glad you're a fan of humor.
That's my, well, you know, some people aren't, right? And some people don't have a sense of humor. But I've always studied humorists because I think that it's really interesting to see how they put together funny bits. And there's so many different ways to do it. You know, like Stephen Wright, for example, like the driest of the dry sense of humor. You just say things and you're just that's really funny.
And if you said that same line,
yeah, I wouldn't.
It's all in the delivery. It's all in the talent. And if people don't think, even though there's little one-liner snippets, it's the talent that makes the impact. There is a correlation that they've said in studies for years that the ability to have cynicism and sarcastic wit is a sign of higher intelligence, because it's the ability. And this is what, going back to your AI, it's why AI is got a long way to go, because it cannot, at this point in time, and again, the way technology is expanding, this could come quickly, but it cannot discern those little nuances there that are so critical in the ability to be able to understand the meaning behind that sarcasm and that cynicism. And ultimately, that's, I think, a sign of of a question about what's going on with intelligence in the current world, because again, there is a massive disconnect in this day and age of people being able to, like, understand, accept, and really recognize the nuances that are built there. There's a meme going around right now about Blazing Saddles. It said, if Blazing Saddles was produced today, this is how the movie would be. Opening credits, music, you see the scenery of the Old West, and then it says the end. Like,
well, you didn't laugh at my joke the other day. What does that say about you, Doug?
Well, it wasn't good because you're not Stephen Wright. No, just kidding.
No, I mean, in all honesty, though, I mean, if you look,
because that's why we're here. We're not on stage.
Well, you know, it's funny. When you look at movies like Blazing Saddles, you look at movies like Tropic Thunder. Like, they couldn't make those movies nowadays because the culture has shifted in a way that, you know, when you go back and, I mean, perfect example, like when you go back and you look at, like, and I'm not going to go down the political road, but you look at like statues, if you look at old humor, old movies. I just went back, I was listening to a podcast and I went back and listened to the trailer for Reefer Madness. Holy crap. If you've ever, I mean, I don't smoke pot, but somebody told me about it. I had to watch it. It was like 2 minutes. Holy crap. Was this a huge pile of dog shit propaganda? And at the time, everyone believed it. But you look at it now and be like, wow, was that a steaming pile? And, you know, when you go back and look at other things, you can't judge history by today's standards. You can't. And I think this is the problem that our culture has today is they look at history and say, well, that was wrong. No shit. Of course it was wrong. But you can't like say, wait, George Washington or Hamilton or Jefferson, you can't say, oh, these people were horrible people because they had slaves. Yeah, I agree. But back in the day, that was normal. And it wasn't, like it was a different standard, right? I'm not justifying. I'm just saying that it was a different standard then than today. So you can't like say they're completely horrible people. Don't pay attention to one thing they said. Don't worry about the founding fathers were stupid because they had slaves. Yeah, it was a horrible thing. I'm not justifying it. I'm going to be very clear because I know I'm going to get roasted on this. But the point being is you can't look at history through the same lens you look at the present. It is a different time period, right? And yes, we can disagree on their values and their morals and all these things. Totally agree. But you can't throw out everything people did in history just because today's standards have changed, right? There's a reason we've made progress. We don't have slavery because we've made progress. As a people, for our values, we've made forward progress, right? In a lot of ways. But also, in the past, and comedy is a perfect example. Like you can't look at something 20 years ago and be like, well, that wasn't funny because it dunked on these people. That's the whole point. That's the whole point is that it was being provocative because at the time the standards were so tight that they said these things and it was like, all right, that was really funny because I'm not allowed to say that or think that because things are so, so you just have to, you can't look at the past through the same lens you look at the present, right? Mm-hmm. And the future is going to look at us and be like, wow, what a bunch of idiots, right? Mm-hmm. That's what they're going to say about us too. And we're always, and we're going to say, well, no, that's not true. We're really smart. Yeah. Think about science, right? Perfect example. Look at science. If you don't believe me, go back 100 years. What scientists believed was, a steaming pile compared to what it is today, right? They believe, you go back long enough and people believe bloodletting was science, and
Steve Martin's Dr. Barber on Saturday Night Live. You want it to be, you think it's purely comedy. It was actually based on real. That's exactly how it was. It's why the barber pole has red and blue is because the barbers were the original doctors.
Yeah.
There's science for you.
It's crazy, right? Back when the world was the center of the universe. Remember that? That's when all the the science, what was it? The science has been determined, right? The jury's back and science is determined. And it was like, yep, the world's the center of the universe. Yep. No, it's not the sun.
Galileo was going to get executed. Just because he believed differently.
Right. And he was right. But yet everyone else believes something else. And you know what? The science was settled. Science is settled. Don't discuss it. Mm-hmm. Anytime somebody says the science is settled, you're talking to somebody who doesn't understand science, right? Science is not about truth. It's about the search for truth. There is no such thing as truth because as soon as you say this is the truth, somebody else could come and debunk it. Right. And if they do, it's no longer the truth. That's the whole point of science. It's the search for truth. It's the forward momentum of trying to find what is actually true. Because every time people thought something was true, it's been debunked because later we find out something else. Right. And science is always progressing and we always have a better lens on the truth tomorrow than we do today. And well, in general, right? Of course, there are times like the Dark Ages that wasn't true, but generally speaking, that's how you have to look at things. So when you're looking at the world, you can't look at things definitively and say, yes, this is true. I know it, and it's not going to change. Because the second you do that, you close your mind off to new opportunities, to new realities, to new truths that come up down the road, right? And then you become the old guy who's like, that's still true, even though everyone else has debunked it, right? So the same is true for investing, right? And we're trying to bring this into investing, right? Because this isn't a honky-tonk show. This is an investing show. So let's talk about how this relates to investing. If you look at any sort of investment philosophy or strategy or quote unquote truth, it's always changing, right? We talk a lot about in the show and how everyone says, well, buy and hold is the best strategy. Okay. Yeah, it is during certain periods, but it's not always true, right? If you look at 2000 to 2013, buy and hold didn't do you any favors. You lost 13 years of compounding. Completely lit your money on fire for 13 years. At the end, yes, you started to make a little bit of a profit, but you lost 13 years of compounding. So those of you who say that, yeah, compounding is great, time is great because it'll help you compound your money. Well, only if it's growing. If you look at the 70s, same thing. There's a period where things went up and down, but basically were flat during that period. Now, the period from 2009 up until 2000, well, today, yeah, sure, the markets went up and it was great. And you got a lot of compounding and buy and hold worked. So there are periods where buy and hold works and there are periods where it doesn't work. But if you're one of these people like, well, buy and hold is the only way to go, you're not thinking, right? You're not an agile thinker. And that's okay, right? It's your money. You do whatever the heck you want. But that's not my job. My job here is to teach you why you should be thinking about things differently. It's teaching you how to be an agile thinker and to realize that when things change, your thinking needs to change. You can't be stuck in history thinking, well, I need to go back and, this thing will eventually work, right? I'll eventually be right. And that's really what it's about. And I say that because it's really about ego. We as human beings don't like to be proven wrong. We don't, right? Our ego is fragile, right? And those of you who think you're tough, your ego is still fragile, right? It's just the nature of human beings. Our ego is fragile, and we don't like being proven wrong. Okay, so anytime there's I won't bring in politics, but I'll bring in a term that's been politicized, which is TDS, and those of you who know it as Trump derangement syndrome. That actually has a scientific term that people don't use because they use that to besmirch the other side. But the actual term is called cognitive dissonance. Okay. Now, cognitive dissonance is when a piece of truth smacks you in the face. So you believe in something and something else smacks you in the face as being true. And it basically conflicts with your worldview. And your worldview is basically being shown to be wrong right in front of your face. And rather than accepting that truth, your brain goes into what they call cognitive dissonance, which is it goes into a mode of trying to recreate a new reality, which shows that you're actually right and the whole world is wrong. That is what cognitive dissonance is. Now, people call it Trump derangement syndrome because of the way people act around Trump. But it's not just that. It's around a whole other host of things. And it's actually, politics is built on a lot of this, where if you're proven wrong, people go out and they'll make up a new truth. They'll literally, your brain will recreate a new reality from scratch to show that you're correct and everyone else is wrong.
And the longer this goes on, the more that this becomes a fact in your mind, as opposed to opinion. You begin to ultimately rewire your brain by that thing. That's why there's so much science behind the power of positive thinking, because that type of thinking will rewire the way you think about things going forward and change personality.
Yeah. And I bring all this up because we're trying to teach you how to think on this show. So we're trying to teach you the tools. We're trying to teach you how your brain works so that you can think better, right? So you can think, you can learn how to think and how to change the wiring of your brain and make you more agile and flexible so you're not stuck in your thinking, right? Because if we never changed, we'd still be believing bloodletting was a good idea, right? And so when you're thinking about investing, think about these concepts that we talk about, right? How is this impacting my investing, right? Am I stuck in my ways or am I an agile thinker, right? And so we're going to get into some actual practical stuff here, but I wanted to start with that because I think it's really important that people understand how their brain works so that you'll know. And by the way, we all have it, the cognitive dissonance thing. And like I said, I know people use it and they politicize it, but everyone does it. Your brain is not different. If you're saying, well, no, I never do that, you probably do it worse than everybody else because it means you're fixed in your thinking and you're not willing to accept the fact that this is truth, right? There's science behind this, right? Now, this. If you talk to any person who understands how brains work, they will tell you this. And what's funny is that it affects everybody, and the people who don't think it affects them probably have it the worst because they're not recognizing it. But people who do understand it, like myself, it happens to me all the time. I know it, and I know when it's happening, and it still affects me. But I can go back and reflect and be like, yeah, that was stupid. Like, I was definitely fixing my thinking there, and I was definitely having cognitive dissonance. But if you're mindful enough to kind of take a step back when it's happening, so if you're able to recognize it in the moment, you take a step back and be like, that's really interesting. Like it's really fascinating when it happens. You're like, wow, like this is literally constructing a new reality for me to help me prove that I'm right. And those of you who actually appreciate the ego and the brain wiring, go watch the movie Revolver with Jason Statham. It was a brilliant movie. It was a little bit artistic. If you haven't seen it, it'll make you think. It's like one of those movies to be like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? But it's brilliant. I love them. It's one of my favorite movies because it talks about a lot of this and how to take control of your ego when in reality it's controlling you. So let's dive right in. Doug, you sent a lot of charts here, and I want to talk about some of them. So where do you want to start?
Before you jump on that really quickly, you said something that really meant a lot to me that I want to stress. You talked about people talking about compounding, right? And it doesn't mean anything if the market wasn't going up. And this is something I think that gets just misused so often is, oh, well, if you invest in the markets, you're going to get that compounding, compounding interest, compounding growth. Listen, the thing about, I think people have to be very careful about what compounding is in the markets because they don't compound. The value, I mean, yes, you might get some dividends, you might get some interest that does buy more shares. Otherwise, it's just a valuation that goes up or down, and it's not compounding unless it's consistent. And this is where I want to touch on. So between 2000 and 2022, if you had put your money in the stock, in the S&P 500 or U.S. Treasuries, which do you think would have done better by 2020?
Well, Doug, because you posed the question, I'm going to guess correctly, but why don't you tell us?
All right. Well, the U.S. By 2020, it was the S&P 500. Okay, but U.S. Treasuries were leading the charge on that compounding. Guess what year the S&P 500 finally overtook just investing in the U.S. Treasuries since 2000?
I believe if you bought in 2000, Treasuries are around 6%. So you would have had to not only beat 6% for 13 years, you would have had to accelerate well past that. So yeah. I don't know, but it's 6% is kind of tough to beat when you're getting 0 for 13 years. You would have doubled your money. Basically, you would have doubled your money in at 6% in that period.
If you were sitting in that one treasury, yeah. So this is the 10-year treasury. So it was all over the place. So it's 4.9, 5.2, 4.1, 4.4. So it was varying. But here's the thing. This S&P 500 did not overtake U.S. Treasuries until 2019. Now,
sounds about right.
It started to touch on it right around 2017. It finally came up to about a $1,000 difference. But then we had a negative 6% return in 2018 that knocked it back down. It took 19 years, Kirk. And I know you talk about this a lot, about the lost time. You can't get that back. That is 19 years of lost compounding of just having your money sitting in 10-year bonds. So again, I think it's really, really critical for people to understand how that works. And you brought that up, is compounding only works if the market was going up or if you're collecting interest or dividends that you are constantly reinvesting to buy more shares. Anyway, I'll let you move to the charts, though.
All right, let's start with this one. Oh, wait, was it? Let's start with a little humor. Sorry, those of you who aren't who are audio viewers have to go to the website or YouTube to watch this. I just thought this was such a brilliant, brilliant picture, and it's basically showing like a dad holding his son up so he could dunk a basketball, and it's under the dad it says bull market, and under the kid it says me thinking I'm good at investing. So,
there's a lot of confidence and cockiness and arrogance going on right now in these wonderful markets that anybody can be successful at.
Yeah. And I bring it up because, I mean, most of us think that we're brilliant investors, and really what it is we're brilliant at timing of it being a bull market. And, this is coming right off the Berkshire Hathaway weekend, which we're not going to talk about because I haven't had a chance to run through it. Those of you who listen to me often know I've got a little raspy voice. I got allergies, so I haven't not really caught up in that area. But I do want to say the few things that came out of that, which were fascinating, which is Berkshire reduced their shares of Apple, which has been headline news today for obvious reasons. Also, that they have I think $189 billion. I feel like Mike Myers, $189 billion in cash, because they can't find anything to invest in. Mm-hmm. Now, the Warren Buffett marker should be a marker for us all. It doesn't mean you do exactly what Warren Buffett says, but it should cause you to say, huh, isn't that interesting? Now, that being said, of course, I'm sure Warren Buffett has a lot of that in short-term treasuries earning 5.5%. Okay. So let's say what it is. The opportunity is pretty nice in short-term treasuries.
He's doing what banks are doing. They're just sitting on collecting that Fed fund rate. There's no reason to take any risk.
Collecting that check. And why not? Right. I mean, here's a guy, one of the smartest, if not the smartest investor of our era. And he's getting 5.5% in treasuries. He's not seeing opportunity elsewhere. What are you doing? Right. So that's the question you should ask yourself. I'm not saying you should mimic Warren Buffett, but it should cause you to pause and say, isn't that interesting? Where am I wrong? Where is my thinking inaccurate, right? We just talked about ego earlier in the show. Where's my thinking inaccurate? You have to be really good at teasing out where you're wrong, because we all want to be proved right? We all want to be right in our thinking, and we're constantly wrong. Here's a good example. Warren Buffett's a value investors. How have value investors done in the last 20 years? Horrendous. They've done terror, actually more than 20. It's been probably in the 90s. It's been horrendous. There have been spots of it in the early 2000s. There have been spots of it, but there are very few spots where value investing has done well. And is value investing dead? No, it's not, right? It's not dead. But it has been sleeping for quite some time. And does that mean you should stop being a value investor? Actually, value investing has done reasonably well this year and last year. And most people haven't noticed because they can't see past the Magnificent Seven, which have not been so magnificent this year. So just something to think about. When you're investing, don't throw out value investing just because it hasn't done well in the past, because as we talk about in the show, the paradigm is shifting, right? We're in a new paradigm. The rules are different. The outcome's going to be different. We don't know what it's going to look like. It's going to confuse the heck out of you because you're saying, I don't understand what's going on. Yes, you don't understand because the paradigm has shifted. We don't understand. Like, I can guess what it's going to be based on history, based on the 70s. I could take a really good guess. Does it mean I'm 100% accurate? No, absolutely not. I mean, I've been wrong a few times. I thought we'd be in a recession by now, and we're not. I still think we're going to be in a recession down the road. But honestly, I'm not seeing the signs of it. Like, see, I've been around doing this, professionally for like 25 years, and certainly a few years in college when I was an amateur investor in the late 90s when everyone was a genius. But I have a good feel for the market. Like, when you've been around long enough, like you've seen enough, you're like, all right, this feels like it's going to change and the market's going to change direction. Like, I don't know it for sure, but like you just get a sense. And yes, I can back that up with more data and information, but I'm just trying to be a little bit more clear about when people have been around long enough, you kind of get this sixth sense. You're just like, this feels a little heavy. This feels a little weird. And sometimes you use that to lighten up. Sometimes you don't, but it's more of I've seen this before. Pattern recognition kicks in. You're like, all right, this is probably a good idea that I do this or I do that. And so my point is that don't completely tune out things that you don't agree with. Always look at them and say, all right, does this have validity now? Yes or no, right? It's a decision, right? And I want to point this out. Some people say, well, you got to make a decision going in, you got to make a decision going out of the markets. No, you have to make a decision every single day. Because if you buy ABC stock, if you decide, all right, ABC stock's a good buy, I'm going to buy it, right? You buy ABC stock. Tomorrow, you have to make a decision again. Should I continue to hold it? Now, yes, you probably are thinking, well, I'm not actually making a decision. I'm just sitting on it and waiting for it to go where it needs to go. Sort of. But you own the stock. So you're making a decision to continue to own it. You could also make the decision to sell it, right? That's a decision. So even though you're not making an action, it doesn't mean you're not making a decision. You are actively making a decision to hold it. Now, here's the thing. Most people's brains don't work like this. They buy it and they forget. They're just like, I'm going to buy and hold, right? Because I'm not smart enough to know whether I should buy or sell it tomorrow. And that's okay, right? Most of us are not that smart. But if you think about it, you're buying something, you're making a decision to continue to hold it, right? Just like a house, right? You buy your house. Tomorrow, you're making a decision not to move. The next day, you're making a decision not to move. It may not be an active decision, but it's still a decision, right? You're deciding to stay. Now, someday you might decide, you know what, I want to move, right? And that day you're making a decision, all right, I'm going to switch. I'm going to move somewhere else, right? It's the same thing with stocks, right? Just because you're not selling doesn't mean you're not making a decision. So every year in January, and usually in late December, but in early January, I look at my portfolio. I look through every single position and I say, would I buy this today? And if the answer is no, then I sell it. Every single year I do that. Now, I actually do it more often than that, but I'm giving you guys a framework that everyone should do. At a bare minimum, in early January, late December, you should look at your portfolio and say, would I buy this position today? If the answer is yes, then hold on to it. If the answer is no, then you should sell it. Because that means you're not actively making a decision. It means you've forgotten about it, right? And there are definitely positions in my portfolio I forget about from time to time, and that's just the way things work. But you should actively look at this. Now, as an active portfolio manager, I actually look at the positions every day and I make this active decision. Would I own this again today? Would I buy this again? And if the answer is no, then I sell it, right? I do that every single day. I have to, right? Because I'm managing clients' funds. But for most of us who are not active fund managers and who have a life and do other things, then you're probably not making that decision every single day. So at the bare minimum, you should do it once a year. But I would advise doing it maybe once a month or once a quarter because things change dramatically in the markets. And, if you're looking at it and you're like, wow, this position, I forgot about this and it's really underperforming. Would I buy this today? And most of us think, oh, no, I'm going to buy more. If it was cheap now, it's going to be cheaper later, right? Or it was cheap before, but it's even cheaper now. Let me buy more of this stuff. And so if you're doing that, then you're probably, this is what we talked about earlier in the show, your ego is getting the best of you. It means you don't want to be proven wrong, so you don't want to sell it. Because if you sell it, it means that you're admitting that you are wrong. And rather than admitting you're wrong, you're deciding just to make no decision and put your head in the sand like an ostrich. So it looks like actually we lost Doug here, so hopefully he'll be back with us shortly. But so I think it's just something to recognize. Just be aware that this is how things work and this is how your brain works. And if you understand it, it allows you to actively fight against this and to put up. You can make these mental tricks that'll help you invest better and avoid some of these pitfalls. So while we're waiting for Doug, I'm going to take some of his best charts and I'm going to talk about them. It looks like his internet just went down. Hold on a second. We might have a shorter show this week if his internet went down. Hopefully it goes back up. All right. So we're going to talk. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take two things that I was going to talk about next week. I'm just going to bring them this week while we wait for Doug. So the first one is actually, well, let me give Doug some time because I'm going to dunk on somebody, and I want to wait for Doug because I know Doug wants to have his say in here. But I'm going to go to a listener question, okay? And this listener question was from Rudy. Thanks, Rudy, for your comments. Always appreciate your insights. And Rudy's basically, I'm going to paraphrase this question, but basically he said he wants my thoughts on the divergence between the U.S. economy expectations and other economies around the world. He's from Canada. He basically said, do you have other thoughts of what would change the sentiment in the U.S. market? It seems that people love to push their problems down the road, hoping things will get better. But what happens when it doesn't and when they realize that? As you say, the markets always look ahead 6 months. When do people look ahead 6 months and see a different picture? That's a great question, Rudy. And this really brings into a different framework, which is what we talk about on the show is that the markets, be very clear, the markets look ahead 6 months and they look at what's happening in 6 months and they pull that backwards to today, right? So if the market thinks that ABC stocks earnings are going to stink in 6 months, the stock price is going to fall today. So if information comes out and says, let's say the company comes out and says, well, things are going fine now, but in 6 months, earnings are going to stink because of ABC, whatever. The stock price is going to decline because that's information that is being pulled back in today from 6 months from now. That's normal. But that's not how people think, right? That's how the market thinks, but that's not how people think. Remember, this market is smarter than you and I, right? Because it's an aggregation of the best and brightest and the institutions that are making these decisions. And they are thinking out 6 months ahead. They are not thinking about today and tomorrow. So if you look out 6 months and say, oh, well, inflation's going to rise and GDP is going to fall, just like the hot mess that it was last week. It's going to get worse. Well, the market's going to discount that to today, and the market's going to fall, right? But people don't think that way. People think that today's news is going to affect the markets today. That's just not true, right? They think, oh, earnings are coming out. I wonder what's going to happen. Well, earnings have already been baked into the stock price, right? People already estimate what's going to happen. Now, if there's a big change, so if earnings come out and there's a big change up or down, now it's earnings season still, and those of you who've been paying attention have noticed some huge swings in stock prices, up and down. We've seen some double-digit ups. I get some emails at the end of the day. They're kind of aggregators of information at the end of the day, and some of them have like the top movers. I remember one day there were six. They only show six stocks that were down 10% plus or more, down more than negative 10% or more. Right? At the same time, I've almost never seen that, but I can't remember the last time I've seen that. But this is 10% on 6+ stocks in the same day for earnings. Like, that's not good. And of course, there are just as many up 10% or more. What that means is that the market hasn't accurately predicted what those earnings announcements would be. Now, generally speaking, in quote unquote normal times, the market generally accurately predicts earnings. Now, this is usually a dance between the analysts and the CEO or executives or whoever's doing the call. And the way that works is the analysts talk to the company executives to try to get a sense of what's going on. The company executives are the PR department for the company, and they're like, rah, rah, shish, boom, bah, this is a great company. You should invest in us. We're going to kill it. All that stuff, right? So their job is to pump up the stock price. And the analyst's job is to narrow down as closely as possible what those earnings are going to be. So there's typically a dance. This is all hearsay, I'll just say, but I know it happens because I know enough people who do this. Whereas they're having conversations and they can't send inside information. But the analysts are like, well, what do you think? You think you're going to get $2.50? The corporate executives, I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that. Meanwhile, like, you audio listeners can't see, I'm touching my nose, right? You can't see that. I'm not sure what it's going to be, right? And he's like, anyway, they signal to each other one way, shape, or form that you're close or you're on the right. Or if you're way far off, they'll probably nudge you in the right direction. Because here's why. They don't want to tell you because they can't, right? That's inside information. They don't want to be, talking outside of bounds. They want to be legally compliant. But at the same time, they also don't want the stock price to move significantly. They want the analyst to be within the ballpark, right? You don't have to give them exactly, but you want to be close. Because if it's close, the analysts get a bonus because they were right, and the company gets a bonus because the stock price keeps rising and it doesn't have these, massive shifts because the analysts were drastically wrong. They want them to be close. So this dance has been going on for decades. I don't know how far back it goes, but certainly since the 90s it's been going on. There have been books written on this. So it's not me, just saying hearsay. There's been books written on this. Full of Bull, actually, was a really good one. That was one of my favorites on this topic. But anyway, the point being is that analysts are pulling forward future information into today. Wall Street follows analysts. Wall Street also, is ahead of the curve, right? Individual investors are not. You can't naturally think 6 months ahead. It's not how our brains are wired. So you're seeing information and you're thinking, oh, well, that's the future. No, that's today. That's what's known, right? As soon as it comes out, as soon as it's in the public domain, it is known information, which means it's no longer relevant. The market has already discounted it. So as soon as you see the information, the stock price might drop 10% or rise 10%. That's because there was a disconnect between information and the forward-looking sentiment. And when earnings come out and there's like a ho-hum reaction, it means everyone expected it. It's very, very, oh, good. Doug's back. So that means everyone's expected it. So to wrap up this question, then we'll go back to some of the stuff Doug has, because I want to give Doug a shot to dunk on some of these people. There is, so here's the sentiment. So to answer Rudy's question, the sentiment problem is this. There is reflexivity. Karl Popper came out with this. He's a philosopher, came out with this. George Soros actually talked about Karl Popper's philosophy in his book called Reflexivity. Reflexivity is a thing creating more of the thing. So if we think that there's inflation, we're going to act in a way that creates more inflation. If there's deflation and we think there's deflation, that will actually cause more deflation. Here's the thing. If you think there's inflation, you're going to borrow a lot of money, you're going to leverage yourself up, and you're going to spend it because your debt will be worth less tomorrow and your money will be worth less, so spend it today. That's what inflation does. Now, if there's deflation, it says your money is going to be worth more tomorrow, which means you don't spend it. Because you're not spending it causes more deflation, right? So sentiment causes more sentiment, right? In the same direction, right? But when there's a change, it usually means there's a drastic upheaval in that sentiment. So if you look at 2022, where everything dropped, stocks, bonds, virtually everything dropped in 2022, because up until then, everyone thought bonds were safe, stocks are fine, and we were proven wrong. Everything went down because bonds went down in value because the yields went up. Stocks went down because people weren't expecting it. Everyone was on the wrong side of the boat. And yet, none of this was new information. I want to be crystal clear. This wasn't, nothing was news to anybody because everyone had known about this for months. Powell came out and said, we're going to start raising rates. We're going to do it in January. Like everything was known, but the markets just said, we don't believe you. And then they're like, oh crap, now I believe you. Let's get out. Let's run for the door, fire in the movie theater. So what's going to cause that sentiment to change? I don't know. And that's the truth of it. No one knows. Yeah, I can guess, but look, we just had a quote unquote conflict, not a war, a conflict in Ukraine, which caused the markets to take a hiccup. And yet no one seems to care in Europe or in the US. We have the quote unquote conflict in the Middle East, which has not spilled over into a greater war, albeit there have been some flare-ups that have been questionable. Somehow that hasn't caused anything to get worse. So if those aren't causing the markets to get worse, I really have no idea what's going to do it. It could be high inflation. That could cause it. But I just don't see high inflation in our future. I see inflation picking up a little bit. Is it going to be 9%? No, probably not. So I guess if they're going to start raising interest rates again, that could cause it, but I don't see that either. Could it happen? Could they raise rates a little bit? Maybe, but I don't think Powell wants to change direction. I think he wants to stay pat unless he has to move. So I don't think he's going to drop it. I don't think he's going to raise it. I think he's going to stay where it is because the market seems to be fine. Why do you have to change something if everything's fine? So I honestly don't know what could change the sentiment. Usually it's some piece of information that everybody kind of knows about, but they just realize, oh crap, we need to do something. So for example, in the early 30s, there's going to be a big tidal wave of problems hitting us at the same time. Now, there's no specific date, but it's going to happen right around the early to mid 30s, where we're going to have a big debt problem at that point in time, where there's the debt is coming due and of a bunch of things at the same time. If you look at Social Security, Medicare, and pensions are all coming due at the same time, they're all going to run out of money. That's going to be a problem, right? But it's not a problem today, and nobody seems to care, right? And this is where Rudy said, kick the can down the road. Yeah, down the road, it's going to be a problem. It's not a problem today. So what that means is that means at some point in time, the market's going to decide it's a problem, and then it will shift. But it's so far down the road, no one seems to care, right? People are not thinking about the future; they're thinking about today. And so, you know, I don't know if that really answers your question, Rudy, but I'm just trying to explain how the market thinks about it. And yes, people push the problems down the road. No one likes to address the problems today. Social Security won't be solved until it's too late. Medicare, pensions won't be solved. It's already too late, by the way, for Social Security and Medicare. I'm sorry, Social Security and pensions, it's already too late for many of them. There's nothing you can do about it. So what do? You just put a Band-Aid on it and hopefully it lasts longer. That's how the government handles it. It could have been solved decades ago. It can't be solved now without massively printing money, which of course causes more problems. So, I know that's not a great answer, but that's the best answer I got for you, Rudy. So hopefully that helps. You sent in a second question about CPI. We're going to address that at a later date. But now that Doug has joined us again, his internet has decided to come back up. So I wanted to dunk on Dave Ramsey. Sorry, I was going to do it while you were gone, but I couldn't do it without you, Doug, because I knew you would enjoy this. So I'm going to show you a tweet. I think it was a tweet that he sent, which is the top 5 careers of millionaires. Engineers number 1, accountants number 2, teacher is number 3, management is number 4, and attorneys number 5. I'm sorry. He says he did this. His team conducted the largest study of millionaires ever done. 10,000 millionaires about who they are and what helped them achieve the goal. I'm sorry. This does not line up with reality. I don't know who Dave was surveying. He must have been surveying the teachers union, the rich teachers union, because there's no way that this is the 5 top careers of millionaires. This is, in my opinion, fake news. But what are your thoughts, Doug?
Well, to give it a teeny bit of credit, I have, gotten to know a number of teachers over the years who have done a really good job saving. I think, obviously with their pensions, it certainly helps, because with their pensions, they were able to put a lot of money away. And at the end of the day, when it comes to retirement income, cash flow is king. And for those of you out there that are thinking that, the only way to build wealth is just build a pile of money, the statistics do show that those that feel much more security in retirement typically have multiple streams of income, whether that's from pension or other things. I know which book this was. I know who helped to do this. They were trying to kind of take that Millionaire Next Door and kind of redo it modern wise. But I'll also tell you that there are a lot of things that are coming out right now. I saw a post this morning about a teacher who was basically trying to sell plasma to get by. I think there's definitely a big divide in who is making the money in education. I have met, again, several teachers they're not millionaires because they're a teacher. It's millionaires in spite of being a teacher. I had a teacher that was my English teacher growing up, who on the side had a driveway blacktop business, very successful locally, was really the go-to for our entire community. And he drove a very nice car that starts with the letter P. Okay. But it had nothing to do because he had better grammar. Okay. It had to do because he took the risks of doing something outside of teaching. So I think the biggest problem with this is that it's not taking into enough consideration the whys behind where these numbers are coming from, who they were reaching out to, how that impacted. Again, they did this survey. Was this survey just of people that were in a certain segment? Again, there's not enough data behind it. I know the book. I've read the book. But I find that there's a lot of truths and half-truths. I think this falls very heavily into the half-truth category.
I would agree completely. I read The Millionaire Next Door, love the book, and they talk a lot about the why, and it actually makes a lot of sense. In this, look, I love data. I'm a data geek sometimes. Engineers I can understand because they tend to be very good with numbers and thrifty, and the engineer. I love working with engineers.
And incredible incomes. I mean, the engineering is in massive demand right now. If you're going to come out of college with an engineering degree, you've got 5 jobs to look for, 5 jobs trying to get everybody graduating. And I'm making that number up, but let's put it this way. There's lots of choice.
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of engineers as clients, and love working with them, and they're really good savers. In general, it's rarity that I've met an engineer that's not a good saver. Mm-hmm. Accountants, I can tell you, I've seen the statistics for accountants. They're not making a lot of money. They're making less than $100,000 a year on average. I don't know how. Now, it could be that you're taking it says accountant, CPA. Those are actually different. CPA is a designation. Accounting is more of a profession, right? So if you look at accountant, it could be you're the CFO of a company, right? And yes, I'm sure CFOs make a lot of money. If you have a CPA designation and you're running a company and you're good with math, yes. But if you're talking about, Joe and Susie lunchbox tax preparer, absolutely not. They make less than 6 figures on average. Some make more, a lot make less, but I would say that is also a half truth right there. Teachers, obviously, half truth, as Doug said. There's no way on a teacher's salary they can become millionaires unless they're eating cat food every day, because it doesn't, the numbers don't add up. Management, I get. Attorneys, I'm a little shocked at attorneys. Surprisingly, even though they make good money, there are very few of them that are millionaires that I've met. Most of them spend a lot of their money, and it's not. They're some of them are good savers, but most of them are not. So I call BS or half truth on this, because it doesn't line up with what I've seen. And I talk to people all over. I'd say we probably have a higher likelihood of financial advisors being millionaires than a teacher, and it's just so Anyway, I just wanted to point this out, because just like most of the stuff Dave Ramsey has said recently, it's bunk. So we'll see. Not all of it. I mean, if you're a Dave Ramsey fan, kudos to you. He does good stuff with the debt snowball, but I think he's been off his mark a little bit lately. So, Doug, what else do we want to talk about? I know you had a few charts here, and we got another 5 minutes. We got to wrap it up.
And I just want to say this, and it sums everything up. I just told you what U.S. Treasuries did versus the S&P 500 since 2000, and he still touts 12% a year. 12% a year returns in the market, and that's all you need to know. So there's some great advice for getting out of being financially destitute. But when it comes to actually, once you start making money, what to do, the advice really fails in many marks.
Hold on. Let's take that and pivot here. Well, not even pivot, but here's Perfect. A good segue. Yeah. And we talked about Dave Ramsey and debt reduction. Maybe the U.S. government should, right? What's this chart, Doug?
So this chart is talking about basically what the interest payments of the United States is going to have to be paying over I think this goes twofold, because there's another statistic I think that you have to say first. The U.S. has added $100,000 in federal debt every second in the last year. Since March 1st, the U.S. has been adding a staggering $10 billion in debt per day. That's $417 million per hour. There's $6.9 million per minute and $115,000 per second as interest. Okay. So when you start talking, but basically what's happening is there could be $1.7 trillion in annual interest expense in just 1 year from now. Okay. It goes back just like when we run our household. And again, the federal government has the beautiful position right now of being the international currency to have a lot of flexibility you and I don't have. But at the same time, if you go back and you look at the U.S. debt chart and look at the tax receipts the U.S. government is bringing in, and then you look at its obligations, these are the fixed obligations that it has to pay. We are bringing in trillions of dollars less than we have to pay this year. So every time you bring in $1 but have to pay $1.20, that 20 cents comes from somewhere else. Okay. The problem is, since none of that money's free, since when you borrow, it's going to have an additional cost, the interest on that, it becomes an escalating, compounding problem, because the 20 cents you just added is 20 cents plus additional interest. So now it's going to be 1.21 the next year, and then 1.22 the next year. All of a sudden, the cash flow of what you're bringing in gets squeezed more and more and more. We've talked about this, that the interest obligations are exceeding what we have in military obligations. The U.S. government does not have enough money to pay. And if you look at where this is going, and this is projected into April 2025, we're only talking a year from now. Look at where we were in 1990. Look at where we were by the end of 2020. It only grew from about 250 to maybe little over 400. It doubled. That was 30 years. And in 5 years, it has compounded another 400%. Okay. There's no end in sight. Okay. How do they combat that? There's only a couple of ways. First of all is to cut spending. That doesn't seem to be a very popular political decision. The second way that they can do it, raise taxes. That does not seem to be a very popular political decision. So, Kirk, when you say, let's look down the line, that nobody wants to worry about tackling that right now. That's not a now problem. That if interest is not a now problem, inflation is not a now problem. It's not, because the problem is that people don't feel the pain. They're going through there every day, but there's that pain has a cost. And at some point, like you just talked about 2030, that's when it's all going to hit. And the problem is we're going to react when, as you said, it could be too late. The U.S. government has incredible flexibility, but watch the yen, because what's going on in Japan right now has tremendous impact to what we're facing, because Japan holds tons of U.S. debt. And if they have to figure out their own economy by selling it, that could exacerbate and speed up some of those challenges.
Yeah, well, that's the show for this week. Doug, take us home here. Where can people find more about you?
Well, listen, what if you want to find more about me, go check out Mergent Advisors and mergentcollegeadvisors.com. College is one of the main things we focus on, but when it comes down to it, college is just one massive major purchase cost that is fleecing the wealth of Americans. Poor decisions. It's an emotional decision, overpaying what you can afford for college. At the end of the day, what does this all come down to? I said it before. It comes down to having enough income to basically afford the things you need, but also be able to afford the things you want. And if you do not plan college, and if you don't plan everything appropriately, you're not going to live in that position of being able to have those types of choices. And that is what really comes down to one thing. It's taking unnecessary risk. Do you know what kind of risk you need to take? Do you know what kind of return you need to get? Do you know what kind of savings you need? Do you know what you can afford? If you can't answer all those questions right now, why don't you find out? Go to emergentadvisors.com. Go to emergentcollegeadvisors.com, formerly Pro College Planners. You've heard me talk about that. Those that listen, we changed our name to kind of synchronize our branding under Emergent Advisors. Check it out at our websites. Get some information. Download some of our free information. Why not? It's free because it could start to get you to think about it. If you've been thinking, I talked to someone this weekend. They said, look, I've been thinking for years. Like, am I doing enough? Do I have things in order? Or maybe it's like, I know I have things in order, but my spouse, is asking some questions, wants to know, get that third party, figure it out so you can have peace of mind, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, well, thanks, Doug. I appreciate you coming on the show this week. And that's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us, the Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name is Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on the show. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and the podcast app of your choosing. You can also check out the show at moneytreepodcast.com. On the website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Also, we're now on YouTube. Please check out the YouTube channel. When you're there, please subscribe and leave a comment. Lastly, please leave a show rating and comment on the podcast app of your choice. Oh, and don't forget, do your own research. This show is for informational use only. We're not telling you what to think, merely how to think about investing. We're also not selling any products or services, so do not consider this advice. If you have any problems with the show, I blame Putin. Please send him an email, express your feelings. If you're seeking financial advice, talk to an oracle or a fortune teller, or maybe just a licensed financial advisor. I'm one. As I said earlier, I'm not selling anything, but I'm easy to find. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do. So invest